Hey, I'm Matt at Mr. Maple, and I'm here with Tiger Woods today to discuss protecting your Japanese maples from frost.
Howdy, I'm Tim, and we greatly appreciate watching today's video. Make sure you like, subscribe, and also make sure you sign up for our weekly emails on Mr. Maple. We add a bunch of cool new plants every Tuesday at 10 a.m. You'll want to be a part of that.
So today we're discussing protecting your Japanese maples from frost. We're actually here on April 1st. You know, frost is no joke though. It's nothing to mess around with. It's something that can damage your Japanese maples. Very frequently people ask me, I'm gonna have a frost coming up, I don't need to do anything, do I? And it's like people ask you, like, just wanting that affirmation that they don't need to do anything, and then they're disappointed because my answer is always, yes, you do need to do something. And so, you know, if you're gonna have a frost and you know it's an actual frost, we wanna give you the steps you can take to better prepare your plant for success. Frost can often be very damaging for young acers, especially, you know, very young 1 and 2 gallon size plants. You're definitely going to want to protect them from a hard late freeze or frost. Today we're specifically talking about that frost-like condition. That's where you get that layer of ice in the morning. You'll know it when it's on your car. You know what a frost looks like on your car. The same thing will settle on your plants, and it can cause a little bit of tip damage to some of those plants, especially in the early spring.
And on young plants, young 1 gallons, that tip damage can actually cover the whole plant and can sometimes damage it really badly, and sometimes may even kill certain varieties. So you want to be very, very careful. An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. You always want to take steps you can to help protect these Japanese maples from frost.
So we're actually here in Mr. Maple Gardens at the Maplewood Knoll Gardens. We're in front of the original Jade Dragon here. Typically one that does leaf out a little bit early, so it's one we have to watch sometimes on those late frosts here in western North Carolina. A lot of our plants in this garden haven't quite gotten in full leaf yet, and we'll discuss what breaking bud means, what in full leaf means, and like what we're basically describing. So this one I would consider to be further along in leaf. The tree's already reached a progression where it's got a lot of foliage on it, a lot of tender young new growth. Now, Japanese maples are pretty durable plants. They can actually take a good bit of frost and do pretty well, but it's always better to be prepared. You know, it always amazes me how well they recover. Oftentimes this garden here gets a little bit of frost in the spring and it looks amazing 2 weeks later. It's not uncommon for us to even have a frost 2 weeks before our open house event and then have people here touring the gardens, photography crews here several weeks later. So as trees get more mature in the ground, they certainly are a little bit more resistant to that, and they certainly recover quicker. Now, you saw our video on Japanese maples and cold snaps. After frost, you want to do the same thing. You want to water to help them give that rejuvenative stage. You're pushing new foliage out, and you're giving your tree the best success rate there by making sure it gets watered well after it gets that damage from a frost. Now, we're going to get a little cooler this weekend. We may not have to cover. We're kind of monitoring what's going on, but stay ahead of the temperatures. If you're seeing those lower 30s, that's typically the temperatures where frost occur. You know, if you're getting into the upper 20s, you know that's a possibility for frost. What you want to do is prepare to cover those trees to give them their best success rate. Now, I'll go into what to avoid for a quick second. We're going to talk a little bit about some things you want to use and some things you may have in your house to use to cover your trees for frost. One of the things I definitely recommend avoiding are plastics, especially clear plastics. If you're putting a trash bag around your Japanese maple, you're going to need to get that off immediately that day, because even same day, several hours later, you may be causing more damage to the tree with the bag than the frost was going to cause initially, because that heat can really magnify under that poly and cause more damage than even frost would have been the issue.
A light frost can even occur at temperatures up to 36 degrees. As you start to get colder and colder temperatures, a heavier frost can occur on maples, and that's going to be more damaging as those heavier frosts. Now, we always recommend an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. I can't say that enough. So best to always take action, because weathermen aren't always 100% accurate as well, and those temperatures can get more accurate as we get closer, but sometimes we can have some weather patterns that really change really fast and drop down even further than they expected.
It's always that frost I'm not prepared for that's the worst one. You know, it's often that repeating frost after you've just prepared for one, and then a week later you got another frost and you weren't ready for that one and it surprised you. So definitely take into consideration that a frost is different from a hard freeze. We actually did a video on what to do with your Japanese maples in a cold snap, so check that one out if you're going to be experiencing some prolonged colder temperatures. You know, you may want to protect your trees, bring them inside. This video basically deals with how to care for Japanese maples that are outside that you're not able to bring in. You know, if you have them in a container, get that tree inside by all means. That's going to be easier than covering it with something. If you can bring it in temporarily and bring it back out, that's typically going to be a way better method than having to cover it or something like that. So go the easiest route. What works easiest for you? If you've got a lot of plants outside, you may have to cover a lot of them because your wife may not let you bring them all inside. I know that can be an issue for some people too. But today we're going to talk about covering Japanese maples that, kind of give them a little bit more frost protection, and some ways that you may have some materials at home that will help you do these things as well.
So first, let's discuss what not to use. We've done the full gambit. We've made all the mistakes. I hope that you can learn from our mistakes so you don't make those same mistakes. Number one, don't use plastic bags. Plastic bags will make the situation so much worse when covering for a frost. When you cover a Japanese maple with plastic for frost, it does this weird thing where it makes the frost so much worse inside the bag.
It also dehydrates the plant a little bit. So even that quick morning sun there is going to dehydrate the tree. It's going to pull the plant, the moisture out of the plant, and it often sets it up for more damages.
And that's what a frost does, is it's taking the moisture out of the plant and it's dehydrating the plant. And when you put that plastic bag around it, you're exacerbating the situation and making the situation so much worse. And often the plant would have been better if you would not have even covered it at all than if you covered it with the plastic bag. So number one thing don't do is don't use plastic bags. That's a big no-no. Don't use plastic of any type because that will make the situation worse, especially if that plastic is touching foliage.
So number two, I'll jump in here. I would avoid spraying your trees. A lot of people see nurseries, especially in the deep south, that have those amazing sprayers that are all outside nurseries, and in frost conditions they're out there and they're creating a layer of mist over top of azaleas or something like that. I don't recommend that unless you have the specific equipment and knowledge of how to do that. That's a very tricky thing to get right. If you're plus or minus a couple degrees there, you may create a more damaging ice condition for your plants. So I typically say avoid that at all costs for the homeowner. There are much easier steps that can get you more success and are less risky. That one's going to be more risky. Typically, if you're introducing more water into that temperature, you're just opening yourself up to more damage.
Yeah, Matt raises an excellent point about that. I've seen so many times people think they're doing the right thing by going out and putting water on their plants. And they actually had a nice windy day where the humidity was at the right place where they wouldn't have had as much frost because of the wind, but by adding the water to the situation, they've made it so much worse because they've put the humidity at the right point for frost when they wouldn't have had that originally. So the rest of the plants that they didn't treat were fine, and then the plants that they put water on had the damage.
I mean, unless you're like a technician in aqua, hydro skills and know exactly what you're doing with all the watering systems, I wouldn't recommend being out there with a hose. One, you're going to freeze your hands off, but two, you're just putting yourself more at risk. And so I think counting that out, just go ahead and skip that step and look at some of these other steps to get yourself better success.
I wouldn't take that risk myself. I know I've tried that before and failed at it.
Yeah.
And leave that to the professionals in the apple industry and the peach industry and the fruit industry who do that, because it's not necessarily the best thing for the homeowners. We're going to make a lot of mistakes.
And certainly with Japanese maples, these things may work differently with broadleaf evergreens, other types of plants,
azaleas,
fruiting
other
plants where you're trying to protect a bud specifically or a flower that may have a different overall cause. With Japanese maples, we're talking about very tender foliage, so adding water to this situation isn't the thing there. And it may work for other plants. This is specifically for Japanese maples. I would say skip it. Now, I'll throw out a 3 here for you, and I know you know where I'm going with this one.
I know exactly where you're going with this.
Don't put a bucket over your tree and then put a heat lamp in there.
It will dehydrate your plant, cook it to smithereens. We had a plant that we loved. We were trying to do our best to save during a deep freeze, and we did that and burned it to crisp.
So we bring that up in our frost video because, a lot of the same things are going to get, into your thought pattern of like, what should I do? We're going to be really cold. So, we had a black nursery pot we put over a plant, and there was actually a heat lamp in there, and I think we took it off, and it was kind of like smoke rising off the ground. And it wasn't very long. I mean, we're talking only a couple hours. It was gotten the same day out of there, but the damage was already done. It had slowly baked or quickly baked. That cake was done and that tree was done. So don't do that.
We've made all these mistakes, so we hope you can learn from those mistakes and then learn from what we've learned to what to do right. And so next we're going to start covering what to do right, because there's so many things that you can do that'll help this plant quite a bit. And now a word from our sponsor.
Hey, today's sponsor is MrMaple.com. They're a great place to buy Japanese maples with over 1,000 different varieties, you're sure to find one you like at MrMaple.com. I know I get all my Japanese maples from MrMaple.com because I'm not only one of the owners, I'm also a customer.
Hey, I do too. So we often get asked, at what point should we cover a Japanese maple? I've got some trees that are in leaf, some trees that are just starting to bud, and some trees that are fully in leaf. Obviously, we're standing here with this Jade Dragon directly in front of us. This tree is fully in leaf. This is a tree that really needs to be covered when we have a frost.
Yeah, this one's already in full leaf here. You can kind of see what that looks like. It might not even be all the way filled out. Sometimes these will even get denser later into the season. But at this stage right now, this tree needs some protection from a heavy frost. Now, there are lots of cultivars that leaf out earlier and some that leaf out later. You know, something like Katsura is going to be one of those first things that always leaves out in the early spring. But you have to be cautious that some seasons are going to be a little different. I have behind me here a Seiyun Kaku, and this one has a few leaves just starting, but overall the plant is still very dormant. So I would say at this stage, this tree doesn't need protection from a fairly medium frost. I mean, even to a heavy frost, I wouldn't protect this plant. I definitely would during a cold snap, so there is a distinction there. But for a frost, I would leave this plant out, and it's going to be okay. It's a, this is a zone 5 plant that's going to be rated for what we're going to encounter. It's going to be a little bit different if this tree was 2 weeks from now and fully in leaf, but at this stage here, I think you're okay.
And in the same garden, we have a Crimson Queen that's just got a lot more leaves starting to pop across this. The leaves have really started to unfurl, and there's a clear distinction that it's on the precipice of being fully leafed out in the next week or so. It definitely needs to be covered as well.
Yeah, it's kind of right in that in-between stage right now. Some of the tree is more in leaf than the rest of it. Again, I always say it's better to take that prevention. Go ahead and take a step, cover. It's always better to do the prevention. As long as you're doing the prevention that's not going to lead to more issues, you're in a great spot. So we're trying to give you some skills that will make it easier, and that if you do these preventative measures, you're reducing your chances of damage.
With frost, you have to be very understanding of your microclimates in your garden. You may have the majority of your garden in a situation where they don't get much frost. Mm-hmm. Maybe the wind hits just right in certain parts of your garden, where other spaces you sort of have a dead space where that wind doesn't just flow through. Those types of spots in your garden may be areas where you may have a plant that gets frosted every single year, and you always have to cover if you have a plant in that situation.
Yeah, and frost can be weird. You can have two trees very close to each other in the same garden. I've had people with two Ariadnes in the same garden, not very far apart at all, and they said, what happened here? There can't be frost because I had another one in the same garden. They're only 12 feet apart. And frost can be weird like that. You may have frost damage on a plant that was very close to another plant, and for whatever reason that area stayed a little warmer or just less frost settled there. So that's certainly something we see, especially here in western North Carolina.
So one thing that I often recommend in those spaces, if you have spaces in your garden where you want a Japanese maple, go towards Japanese maple varieties that leaf out later, and then you can put those in those spaces that get a lot of frost in the early spring, and you can help avoid having that frost damage in the early spring in those spaces.
Yeah, another trick is having more shady conditions. If you're in an area where you know you're getting brutal frost all the time, if you have late day shade, you're actually going to leaf those trees out a little bit slower sometimes, and that's going to provide you possibly the 2 weeks, of later leaf that you need to then not be leafing out super early. So something like Katsura, it may be able to handle full sun, but if you can put it in late day shade, you're less likely to get some frost damage. So that's just another tip to try to give you the best success.
So we've covered what not to cover your Japanese maples with. Let's talk a little bit about what to cover your Japanese maples with. Here we've got, this is frost cloth. This is a very lightweight, thin material. It's real breathable, and this is what nurserymen often use when covering plants for a frost. It's often used in fruit and a lot of other things. If you have time and you want to have some of this in your garden for when frosts happen, you can order it online and have this in your garage ready to pull out whenever a frost comes. This is something that we use. It's very lightweight. It doesn't put a lot of pressure on the plant. Mm-hmm. And this is a great material to use when covering Japanese maples out in the landscape for a frost.
Yeah, one thing I like about this is the color. It's white. It's going to provide you less heat buildup. You can have a little bit more time to get this one off. I still don't recommend leaving it on very long. That new growth is going to need sunlight. It's going to need recovery time and water. And so you still want to get this off as quickly as possible. But one of the benefits of that frost cloth is certainly it's going to stay a little cooler and a little more breathable than other materials. So you be conscious of your materials you're using. Now, not everybody has frost cloth. You may not have time to order some. You may know there's a freeze coming up this weekend or something, or a frost coming up this weekend, and you don't have time to bring that frost cloth in or to go to town and get some. So an easy alternative that you may have is just a fitted bed sheet. This one's a fitted bed sheet. They tend to work really good because you already got some angles there, but any kind of bed sheet works. An older bed sheet is going to provide you, with some breathability, preferably a lighter color. This one's kind of a bluish green if you actually get the right color to it, but something like that's not going to be too dark. You don't want to put something there very black or heat, build up in there, because you can actually, you'll be surprised, the trees are very sensitive after that to the light as well. So you're going to want to get something on there that's cooler and lighter in color, but a bed sheet makes a great alternative that most people have in their house already. Now, there are a lot of different ways to seal these things down. Often right before frost, you're dealing with windy conditions. So you need to be conscious of a windy condition. And there's nothing sadder than putting on your frost cloth, on Friday night. You're getting a frost coming Sunday morning.
Friday morning, 2 a.m., you get those heavy winds that blow off all your sheets.
It looks like ghosts in your garden to everybody else that night when they're driving by. It's just the ghostly garden. We've done that here. Like, what is going on out here? And there's just bed sheets everywhere covering all these plants. You want to be careful that you're not putting it on too early and it's going to blow off. We typically secure ours with something like duct tape to itself. Now, you wouldn't want to tie it back to the actual plant, but you can secure a bed sheet around the plant, back to the bed sheet itself with something like duct tape, and get that on there securely enough that it's going to hold to the tree but not blow away. You got to be conscious of that. If it's small enough you can move it inside in a pot, go ahead and do that, because it's going to be harder to secure around a smaller plant. Another benefit to both these items are they're lightweight. So be conscious of the weight you're putting on there. You don't want grandma's quilt. You're going to break your tree more than the frost if you're out here putting a heavy blanket on it. That's why a bed sheet works better than something maybe thicker. But it's an easy way to cover it, something most people have. Fitted bed sheets are typically the best because you get some good angles on there and you can kind of tuck them back into themselves a little bit around a plant, especially something this size or a lace leaf. You can kind of get it to encompass it a little bit more. In a perfect situation, you get a little bit of wind because the wind actually breaks up some of that frost. So the windier it is, it's actually better. Often wind will prevent you from needing to do much frost protection. The problem is when that wind lays right before sunrise. That's when the damage actually occurs, is when the sun hits the frost on the leaf. If you can avoid that stage, you typically can avoid, the whole problem. But the wind actually breaks the frost up. So if it's heavily windy, it may not even be needed. So be conscious of that, but also look at when that wind's laying down, because if that wind quits completely right before sunrise, that's when the heavy frost occurs.
And that's the problem that we see so often with people who go out and put all this work into protecting your plants, is the wind blowing it off after all morning and then settling that morning right when the frost happens. Mm-hmm. And so I can't reiterate enough, make sure it's nice and secure around the plant. Like Matt mentioned, if you're going to put duct tape around the base of the plant, don't put it on the actual plant itself, but duct tape it to the bed sheet or the frost cloth. That's the best way to do it, rather than duct taping around the base of the plant. If you duct tape the actual base of the plant, sometimes you can actually pull off some of the bark along with it and damage the tree. Yeah. So always keep that in mind as well. And I think you're going to have a very successful time in protecting your Japanese maples from frost during this frost that you're getting.
Hey, something's better than nothing. So if you know you're getting wind and you don't have time to secure it with duct tape or small ropes, definitely go ahead and just get it over the plant, especially if the wind's laid down already. Throw something over everything tender in the garden, kind of protect it a little bit. Bigger trees tend to protect themselves a little bit. So we're talking a little bit more about our smaller size plants. If you have a 30-foot Japanese maple, you're probably not going to notice any of the frost damage because it's going to be 30 feet up in the air. So you may have some frost damage that year, but often those branches are going to protect the younger branches that are in your sight line anyway. So it's something to be conscious of. People will say, I have a 20-foot tree, what am I going to do? Well, cold snaps, you're more dangerous, but frosts typically aren't going to even be something you know about. And that's kind of what I like about that fitted sheet. If you don't have time to tie it off, it's kind of tucking everything in there a little bit as well.
If you know your Japanese maples are leafing out early and there's the threat of a frost coming, if you have a product like Nature Shield or another anti-decusant, you can actually go out and spray your plants that'll help create basically a layer of glue across the top of the plants that will help protect them partially through some of these frost situations.
Yeah, Nature Shield was created for strawberries to kind of give them that frost protection. It works great for Japanese maples. It's a product you're going to dilute down with water. You can put it in a hose-in sprayer or something like that and get it on there. I do still recommend taking further preventative steps because that helps for a light frost. You may still need to go ahead and go to the full sheets if you're having a little bit heavier frost, but it's a great way to protect some of that light new growth, especially in that early spring. It's actually a step we take here on every Japanese maple each spring. If you're in an area where you know you have a lot of frost, it may be something worth looking into. So you woke up the next morning, there are no sheets in the garden. What do you do next?
What can go wrong inevitably will go wrong, right? That's the rule. What do you do when this damage occurs? You've tried to do everything you can to protect it, but something still happens.
So the first thing you're going to want to do is very similar to our cold snap. Water is your friend here. Once it heats back up to a reasonable temperature and you're above freezing, you want to water your Japanese maple. There's no reason to water the foliage right now because that may be droopy or less, desirable right now. Water the base of your Japanese maple, get it watered in thoroughly. It doesn't want to be standing in water. It's going to need to dry out completely. So there's no reason to put a pot in a tray or holding water. That's going to cause more damage. But your Japanese maple in the ground, go ahead and give it a thorough drink. That's going to help that tree. It's going to give it its most rejuvenation. It's going to give it what it needs to go ahead and start throwing on some foliage, and that'll better help you assess what damages may have occurred during that frost. Now be conscious, you might not notice right away. We go out after a heavy frost, you're going to be like, we made it, awesome. And then maybe a day or two later, you're going to notice more of that foliage has started to wilt and hang down. But it's certainly recoverable, and there's a lot of steps you can take.
So remember, like Matt's talking about, frost is dehydrating the plant. So by hydrating it, giving it water, you're helping that plant start to rejuvenate and get back to a healthy state. One of the great things you can do besides just water is by adding something like a liquid Miracle Grow or a liquid fertilizer that can give the plant not only the water it needs, but some extra nutrients, a little bit extra boost to push out new buds from when that plant got damaged.
Yeah, that's a great way to flush out some new growth. It depends on how severe the damage is. If the foliage is damaged, you may have to form a whole new bud below that. So that fertilizer is actually going to give the plant the energy it needs. We like a liquid fertilizer because it activates more quickly. You're going to be giving the tree what it needs in its quickest stage. You're going to be waiting too long on a granulated mix. It's going to, by the time that starts to release, you're not really going to know the effects. It's already going to be too late for the frost damage help. It may help the plant, but it's not really going to affect the frost damage. So that liquid fertilizer is going to go out more quickly. It's going to give it a faster push right away. Now be careful, future frost, that new tender growth that flushes, you're going to need to protect as well. It is harder the more times you have that frost buildup. Once it's already taken a burn, it's going to be harder the second time around. You have to be a little bit more careful because those things build up. If you're taking 3 or 4 heavy frosts in a year, that may be more damaging to that Japanese maple. So be conscious of that as well. But certainly a light liquid fertilizer is one of the best ways to get your tree into a recovery stage.
Now, the time it takes for that plant to recover depends on the plant, depends on how established that plant is out in the landscape and garden, and depends and varies by cultivar. So people often ask, how often should I fertilize? Don't do it every day. You want to take about 2 weeks in between each time of watering with a liquid Miracle Grow to really give that plant time to soak up those nutrients, soak up that nitrogen, and really start pushing out new growth. And if you give it liquid fertilizer every 2 weeks until you see those buds start coming back on, you're going to be in much better shape. If you start overwatering this plant every single day, remember you've got to let that plant dry out before it starts getting wet again. You don't want to put more issues on it than it already has.
So there are a lot of different things you can use. We recommend Miracle Grow because we've used it and we understand it. So people often ask, what about this? What about this? And the answer is I haven't used everything out there. There's always going to be some new product that we haven't tried. So there certainly are other things you can use. For your average garden, a liquid Miracle Grow is going to be all you need to kind of get that rejuvenation back in the tree and get it going. There's certainly other answers to that would work, but I don't know is the answer a lot of times because I haven't tested that.
And if you do follow these steps, I think you're going to make the best at protecting your plants and helping them recover if they do get hit by frost with your Japanese maples in your spring garden.
Hey, I'm glad to be back making videos. I've been out a few days. My wife Amy and I just had our son. His name is Hicks Nichols, so we're super excited to share that with you. I greatly appreciate the outpouring of support and prayers. Continue to keep Amy in your prayers as she recovers, and we just couldn't be happier to have this new member of our family. And we're just so excited. If you've seen my daughters, you've seen them in some of the videos, like Anaba Shadari and Carolina and Tinsley are just over the moon about having a little brother, and they're super excited. And we're just excited that Mr. Maple family is growing. So I couldn't wait to get back out here and do another video with you, though. We love making these for you. And I just want to say thank you for all the support. We greatly appreciate all the support and prayers.
Yeah, it's awesome being an uncle again for now the 6th time. 3 with Matt and 3 with my other side. It's always exciting to have a new baby in the family. I really hope that you've really enjoyed these videos. We're trying to do things that give you confidence in growing Japanese maples and answer a lot of the questions that we're getting daily here at Mr. Maple. And hopefully these will help you in your gardening and help you not make the mistakes we've made, but learn from our mistakes and protect your Japanese maples during a frost.
That's really what gardening's all about. You know, you can make the mistakes yourself, or you can listen to some gardeners that already made those mistakes. Those are really the only ways to learn. So we hope that this video helped you and gives you more confidence in growing Japanese maples. If it did, definitely comment in the comment section below. You hear me say this a lot, but this is just the beginning of the conversation. If you have tips to prevent against frost, put those in the comment section below. We'd love to hear from you. We'd love to share your tips with the rest of the community. We're building a great community below in the comment section, and that's a great way to share your advice, but also to interact with us.
And remember, what works for one person doesn't always work for everybody. So if you've got tips that you do for this, really participate in the community, comment down below, help some people out, and talk about what works for you and what doesn't work for you in your garden for frosts.
Hey, thanks for watching. God bless.
And have a great day.